Welcome back. We're going to continue with the Enlightenment in this session. I want to characterize these Enlightenment figures, these philosophers, as they were called in France, or these intellectuals. First, the Enlightenment figures are critical of religious orthodoxy. They're critical of what we call the privileged orders, the church and the nobility. They're critical of the monarchy. They're questioning the source of the monarchy's authority and legitimacy. They're critical of magic and superstition. These Enlightenment figures read books. They travel. They attend lectures. They go to concerts. They meet in coffee houses, of all places. There are no Starbucks, but there is coffee coming in from the New World, and these coffee shops are an ideal place to meet and discuss the latest ideas and arguments and trends and books. They, of course, they also traveled to the site of the classical cultures in Greece and in Italy. Remember, there's no YouTube, there's no computer, there's no television. So if you want to see the great works of antiquity, you have to physically go there. Let's characterize these Enlightenment figures as curious, satirical, open-minded, the inclination to question everything. You don't simply accept something because it's always been that way. There's a curiosity and skepticism here. Enlightenment thinkers believe that we can improve our lot. I mentioned this in the last lecture. That we don't have to just endure this life, we can actually enjoy it. They disparage the Christian notion of original sin, and they call for political reform, economic reform. Again, there's a great intellectual energy here. Let me just mention a couple of sort of long-term or even short-term origins of the Enlightenment, events that helped to trigger the Enlightenment thinking. Henry IV, King of France in the 16th century, had issued the Edict of Nantes, which called for religious toleration of the Protestants in France, the Huguenots. In 1685, Louis XIV, the Sun King, revoked the Edict of Nantes. Louis wanted uniformity of religion in his kingdom. One king, one God, one faith. And this revocation of the Edict of Nantes is alarming to people because it looks like we're moving backward instead of forward. So this triggers controversy. Some of these French Protestants attacked this revocation, began to attack the idea of the absolute power of the French king, his ability to do this. Of course, in 1688, across the Channel, James II is driven into exile, the so-called Glorious Revolution that we talked about in the Wars of Religion. What other events or trends provoked the Enlightenment? The feudal order, and I want to emphasize this because it's important. We're going to talk about it when we talk about the French Revolution. This feudal order, or these privileged orders, the traditional sources of authority and legitimacy, the church and the nobility. These Enlightenment thinkers are going to react strongly against these traditional sources of authority. Again, that questioning, that skepticism. The voyages of discovery are going to help trigger Enlightenment thinking. We're finding new things, new continents, peoples that we did not suspect exist, animals and plants that we had no knowledge of before. This triggers the human imagination, obviously. Now, I want to talk about a few Enlightenment figures here. I'm just going to mention a few. kind of like we did with the scientific revolution. Just to give you some examples, John Locke is a prominent figure here, one you may have heard of in high school. There's a couple of things I'm going to mention regarding Locke. He made an argument against the divine right of kings. And this is a precarious thing to do, striking at the very heart of the king's authority, his divine placement by God. Locke said that the king's position was a political one. It had nothing to do with religion or God. He said that a bad king should be replaced. I seem to recall Locke tried to illustrate his argument by pointing to Charles II, who we talked about in the Wars of Religion. Charles II, of course, had his head removed by Parliament in 1649. Locke pointed to that and said, well, if Charles was indeed a creature of God, then would the Almighty have allowed his creature to be beheaded by Parliament? Clearly, Charles II was not divinely protected. Locke also made another argument that's going to have a powerful impact, and that's the notion of natural rights, life, liberty, and property. That probably rings a bell with you. Thomas Jefferson took that life, liberty, and property. He changed property to the pursuit of happiness. I believe Jefferson did not want to divide the American people on the basis of who owned property or not. Not everyone did, but everyone can pursue happiness, can they not? So this is a powerful notion, natural rights. That is, these are rights that come with you at birth. These are not rights that are bestowed upon you by the king or the church. Other figures, Immanuel Kant, German philosopher, Kant said, dare to know. Have the courage to use your own intelligence. Kant said, the Enlightenment is man's emergence from his immaturity. These are nice quotes, and they go right at the heart of this Enlightenment mentality. Denis Diderot, a French philosopher, created the first encyclopedia, a repository of all we know about everything. I think he enlisted many experts to put forth what was current in the field. Government sciences, philosophy, religion, on and on and on. 17 volumes, over 100 different authors. And of course, encyclopedias remain quite popular up until, I guess, the time of the internet. Diderot said, everything must be shaken up without exception and without circumspection. Again, skepticism, curiosity, open-mindedness. Voltaire, you may get a chance to read Voltaire if you take a European lit class. Candide is a wonderful novel. It's quite funny. In Candide, Voltaire satirizes war and religious persecution, sort of blind acceptance of tradition. Voltaire is sort of at the center of this Enlightenment network. He carried out an extensive correspondence. You would not believe the number of letters this man wrote. I saw a collection of them one time. It was astounding. Of course, we don't write letters anymore, do we? So think of Voltaire as sort of the center of this intellectual activity in France. Adam Smith, another gentleman whose impact was very great. He published in 1776 The Wealth of Nations. This sort of gives an intellectual foundation for modern capitalism. The argument made by Smith it sounds counterintuitive at first, but when you think about it, it actually makes sense. He said that if each person pursued their own selfish interest, it will be for the betterment of the community or the society as a whole. Allow each person the freedom to pursue their own interest, economically and otherwise, and society as a whole will be lifted by this. Of course, we've heard of Rousseau. Rousseau will have a direct impact on the French Revolution. His Social Contract, when was it published? 1762. Argued that living alone, man can achieve little, but man in an association with a larger community is capable of significant action. I guess we need to talk about some of the consequences of the Enlightenment, sort of a conclusion. And we'll do that in our next lecture. Thank you.